Welcome, everybody. This is Local Relief Live, where you are going to learn a lot about disasters, especially today. Today is a cool day. Today, you're going to have a friend of mine, for one, but badass in the industry, too. You're going to learn a lot with Kevin Miller. I think you're going to appreciate the information he has. I know I do. But again, our whole goal is to educate you guys on what resources are out there, what information is out there. And my job is really to vet the people that are in here to make sure the information you get is legit. So without further ado, it's Kevin Miller. So thank you, Kevin.
You're welcome. Good morning.
Hi. So really, the reason I brought you on here is because we met in disaster. So we met with Hurricane Ian, and we met at the American Legion and
Thanksgiving. We were handing out meals.
Oh, it was Thanksgiving.
It was fortuitous that we met that day.
Yes. Yeah, that was grateful Thanksgiving.
And I met a lot of what we call stakeholders there, not just you, but other organizations that come in after a disaster, that feed people, provide resources. Gentleman I met that was trying to provide tiny houses.
Oh, yeah.
You remember him?
Yeah.
Out of New Orleans. And the problems he was facing.
Yeah.
And there was a FEMA representative there, and I did not know him, but I know several FEMA individuals out of headquarters in Washington, D.C. because of my work over the years.
Yeah.
And so I was able to follow up with them as well. But yes, but let's talk about what I do.
Yeah, that was going to say. So let's talk about the work that you do, because it is vast. And you've done this, you said a couple minutes ago, for 3 decades.
Three decades I've been doing this.
So tell me what you do.
25 years. Technically, I'm an independent property insurance adjuster, okay? And what that means is I can basically work for any insurance company at any time when they're overwhelmed with claims. And obviously, they have a large need for adjusters immediately following any type of catastrophe, whether it be a wind storm like a hurricane, hailstorm, ice damming, tornadoes, and of course, flooding. And I am registered with FEMA as an independent adjuster. They authorized me to handle flood claims on behalf of the National Flood Insurance Program. Now, the National Flood Insurance Program is obviously, it used to be 100% of the flood coverage, because in 1968, the private market abandoned the citizens of the United States and said, they threw up their arms and said, we can't make any money. And so the Congress in 1968 had the daunting task of creating a flood mitigation and insurance program out of thin air. And so, hence the NFIP was created, and the NFIP basically had a monopoly for approximately 50 years until the last few years, where the private market has come back in and started to insure residences and properties for flood. And remember, flood is not just any water damage into your house. Flood is when surface waters enter a property. Normally, dry land becomes partially or completely inundated with surface waters, as opposed to water that comes in through your roof or windows. That would be on your homeowner's policy. So you have to differentiate those two. So about 5 years ago, the private market was able to come back into the flood insurance business, because what do they have now that differentiated it from 55 years ago? They have better modeling, computer modeling. They have historical data, which FEMA has made available to any private insurance company or any company that wants to start insuring properties for flood. They did this to help, number one, possibly lower premiums, give additional benefits, most importantly, reduce the amount of risk the federal government takes. And it's been somewhat successful. It's grown rapidly. I think there's approximately 25 new flood insurance companies here in Florida alone. Now, after Ian, I'll be honest, some of them started reducing their policies in force because they have to figure out where they can take the risk. And so the point is, there are options for people besides just the National Flood Insurance Program. And again, they dangle the carrot out. First of all, you have to remember, by federal law, the private insurance companies have to have at least the same coverage, minimally, as the NFIP policy provides. They cannot provide anything less. So having said that, how do they sell themselves to a potential customer? They either offer the same policy for a reduced premium, or they add a few little things of additional coverage. For example, your personal property on your NFIP policy only pays actual cash value.
So for those of us, you mentioned the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. And as far as that goes, and I look at that and you're saying what they offer and what they do, but then as a local, like let's say I have my insurance through State Farm or some company or whatever that is.
ABC Insurance Company.
What's the difference? Is it the same, or what's the tie?
So when the private insurance market said, we want to come back into the flood insurance business, the federal government said, fine. Rule number one, your policy has to pay the minimum of what the NFIP policy pays. You can't limit the coverage below what we are paying. So right there, you know they're at least equal, okay? So how does a private insurance company then convince the policyholder, the homeowner, to go with them instead of the National Flood Insurance Program. And it's quite simple. The way they entice them is either a lower premium, okay, or they add extra benefits. They pay replacement cost on contents. They may give what's called additional living expense. A lot of people aren't aware of this with their flood policy. There is no coverage for additional living expense. Unlike if your house caught on fire, your insurance company would pay for a hotel or for you to rent a house until construction is complete. The National Flood Insurance Program has never offered that additional living expense. It offers two coverages, the building and personal property. So the way a private company coming into the market can entice a potential client to go with them is by lower premium or additional benefits. And some of them offer like $5,000, $10,000 additional living expense, replacement cost coverage, as I said, on contents, and a few other little items, again, just to make it a little bit better. And so as you as a homeowner, what you have to decide is, okay, is there any other difference between the NFIP and private insurance? And quite honestly, there's not. The same adjusters who are working NFIP claims are probably working private flood now at this point as well. Not all of them, but some of them. So, and your claim is being adjusted almost identically with the exception of possible additional coverages that the private market offers. So the private market, everyone should look into. They just have to go to their local agent. I don't sell insurance myself, and say, who are the companies that are offering the flood insurance outside of the NFIP, the private insurance companies? And what the agent will do is give them basically a spreadsheet, a column, say, here are your choices.
Okay, so right there, a question for you there. So the person is at a point where they have vetted insurance companies and say, I like this or that one or whatever. But even there, I'm looking as a local going, I just moved to Florida.
Right.
I don't know what to look for as far as insurance go. So I have no idea whether I've never experienced a hurricane, whether I'm in an area that's brand new, whether I'm looking at a home or, whatever the case is. But I know right now I need insurance. What am I looking for?
Well, same as I would for a homeowner's policy. When I compare homeowners policies, is there additional coverage by one entity, one company versus the NFIP? That would be the first thing. And then the next thing you look at is the premium. Is the premium that much different? And do I want to go with a private insurance company or do I go with the NFIP? It's really that simple. You look at coverages, additional coverages provided, and the premium amounts.
What do you look for, or what's your suggestions for, we had a wicked hurricane, more than anybody, we had a wicked hurricane season last year.
Yeah.
As far as hurricane coverage goes, like what are your recommendations, whether it be flood, whether it be anything, and also what are the misconceptions? But first we'll start out with recommendations and say, from that standpoint, I'm a local, I have, I live in Florida or live in an area that's prone to, what are your recommendations as far as
I do the
goes?
same thing that I just said. I look at coverages because on the homeowners is different because they have what are called endorsements or riders to the policy, which either gives or takes away coverage. So you have to compare that on each company because that can vary greatly for homeowners insurance. Those are all privately owned companies. Your State Farms, your Nationwide, your Allstates, and there's probably 70 other homeowner insurance companies here in Florida that, and each agent carries just so many of those. So you could look at different agents because some agents will be selling 5 different types of policies, 5 different companies, and another agent could have a 5 completely different list. When it comes to the NFIP, it's the same thing. I look at the coverages and the premium amounts. And am I willing to pay a little higher premium, possibly for additional coverage? I'm okay with that because it gives me additional living expense. And that can be quite expensive. All these homes that got damaged, what are we, 7 months out of Helene right now? That was September 26th, give or take. And how many of those homes have been restored? Some of them, for sure. But there will be people that have to elevate their homes, which is a whole nother issue. The substantial damage issue, over 50% of their replacement cost value. It's going to take a year or more, 2 years, to get their home fully restored and rebuilt. Yeah. And no policy pays for any additional living expense as far as the NFIP goes. And the other ones, they offer very little. So that brings up another point. People need to be prepared. I don't care what kind of loss you have, be it a homeowner's or policy or a flood policy. There are limitations to every policy in the country. Simple as that. You are going to be out of pocket. And so people have to basically be responsible for themselves and be prepared to pay additional living expense or whatever else.
Yeah. Now, I did hear, I think it was during Ian, I talked to someone, they were here from Louisiana, I think they were an adjuster, and they said the one thing that people need to know is that before a hurricane season comes, to pay like $100 or whatever it is to go to your insurance company and reevaluate the value of your home.
Okay, so you're talking about valuation. That is a good point. So your insurance policy is based on the replacement cost value of the building. not the land, just the building. People always want to save money, and sometimes the agent, either accidentally or on purpose, underestimates the value of the house, the replacement cost, and insures it for a little less. That can run into a problem if you have a major loss, obviously. And then the example I think you may have given is where nobody meets with their agent typically all the time.
Right.
And so years could go by and you just sign it to, they email you a contract, you sign it and send it in. And no one has done a rework of the estimate of the replacement cost value of the house. And we know how inflation.
Oh, it's crazy.
It's crazy. So homes that may have cost $500,000 5 years ago, the replacement cost may be $750,000, $800,000 now. And you have to be insured 80% to value on most homeowners policies without being penalized. So that's important. You have to make sure your insurance policy is based on the at least 80% of the replacement cost value so you don't get penalized.
Yeah, I think that is, for the little effort I think that it takes, I would definitely make sure that, that is done. And again, this information.
No, that's great information. And the point that you started to make was when you were talking to the gentleman, he said before the storm hits, what you have to do. Let's keep on those lines.
Done.
Before the storm, everybody should know by now, especially in Florida or anyone that's ever had an insurance claim, you should be photographing and documenting all of your house, every single room in your house, all of your personal property. Just take pictures of everything. You can make a list if you've got the time, but just take your time in each room. And I literally go around, I'll stand in the middle of a room and take pictures of every wall. And of course, on the high-end ticket items for personal property, I would take individual pictures of them so that because, how many homes were completely washed out from the last hurricane?
Yeah.
So before the storm, check with your agent. Number one, make sure you've got proper coverage. Number two, document everything. It can be done any day. Just do it now. Document your entire house and all your personal belongings. It's the best and safest way to ensure that you won't have what we call leakage, where you don't get paid what you're entitled to, because you have to document. This is very important for the NFIP. The NFIP is very strict on our requirements as adjusters on documentation of all personal property. We have a higher entity to report to than the private insurance market because the NFIP claims are paid out of the U.S. Treasury, U.S. taxpayers' money. So we can't just pay for a $2,000 sofa if we haven't properly documented, or $10,000 for that matter.
Right.
So people have to remember that. Do not throw out anything until your adjuster gets there. Put it in the garage, put it on the side yard, unless it's building components. Building components, take your pictures before you do any demolition and put it on the front curb. FEMA will hire people to take it away. As far as your personal property, as you take each article out of the house, you take a picture of it, put it on the side yard to be assured, and you save those pictures on a disk or a flash drive for your adjuster. We don't want paper given to us. CDs are obsolete. So just put it on a flash drive, and that'll be very helpful to the adjuster and you, so that you're insured to get all your money. So document before the storm and immediately following the storm before the contractor does anything. And on the flood side, document your water height inside and outside. Just get a close-up picture of it because, again, the federal government requires it. We have to document everything with the National Flood Insurance Program above and beyond. And rightfully so. As a taxpayer, you want to make sure that there's no overpayments to anyone that's not entitled to it. But they're very strict on it.
Absolutely. And even the one thing, too, that I want to make sure we talk about is the after the fact of, just like you talked about, when people lose and the trauma, obviously, that happens there. You mentioned in conversation that you taught, it was either a course or a workshop or something along the lines of grief, when people lose everything. And I really want to, I think that would just be phenomenal, especially for people, whether it's Florida, North Carolina, this past year, I think more than anything, there's a boatload, So what is your, kind of that overview and what's that information like?
So what you're asking me basically is another element of what an adjuster does. We don't just take pictures and write estimates and write our report and turn it in. I've learned over the years, as I have evolved, we're much more than that. People are depending on us for guidance and reinsurance. Short of a loss of a family member or a loved one, a flood loss or any kind of catastrophic loss is the most traumatic event for anyone. And you have to take that into account as an adjuster. And what I realized 15 years ago or so, that people are dealing what are called the 5 stages of grief. And so after Superstorm Sandy in 2012, where there were 144,000 flood claims in the New York, New Jersey area, Connecticut, we were overwhelmed. There aren't enough flood adjusters to handle 144,000 claims in a timely way. And I was given additional claims by a company, and I said, I can't take them, I'm overloaded. And they said, we need you to. And so I took them. And I said, how am I going to do this? And what I ended up doing was commandeering an event center, a community center in Staten Island, after talking to one of my new insureds, policyholders, whose claim I was handling. I said, can you find me a venue? And I ended up getting a room, and I brought all 150 claimants, policyholders, flood survivors, that's what we call them, flood survivors, into the room. And so instead of talking to them individually one-on-one, I talked to them as a group, and I saved myself 150 hours of talking probably. Yeah. And so what I realized was going through this grief. And a lot of us have heard of what's called the 5 stages of grief. And so when they all sat down that first time, and I do it now after every major event, and say, put your pencils down and paper down. I want to talk to you about non-insurance things. And I talk to people about the 5 stages of grief. And not to say I'm a therapist or anything like that, but I wanted them to understand, because I've seen it over and over, the emotional response, the anger, and then depression. And these are all facets of the 5 stages of grief. And I try to explain to everybody, you need to cry. You need to yell and scream. But just remember, with your spouse or loved one, you're not mad at them. You're mad at the situation. And then laugh about it. And then once you get through that, you have to get to the final stage, which is acceptance. I said, the sooner you can get to acceptance, say, okay, this is what life has dealt me. I've got to do what Kevin says and document everything, and let's get the most payment, maximize our payment, and not allow for any leakage or waste, so that I get paid my full amount. So, and I've had grown men, former state troopers, after, I think it was Charlie, cried on my shoulder when his mobile home park got destroyed down there near Matlacha on the way to Matlacha. And so you see it from everybody. And what I find is, at the end, the women, and I'm not a sexist at all, women who say, I don't know anything about construction. I said, you're going to know more about construction if you just keep asking questions. If you have a question, ask your contractor, ask your adjuster. There are no dumb questions, because nobody knows flood insurance. Very few people know construction elements. And I tell everybody that. I said, there's not a man or woman in this room that knows construction like I do, or the flood policy. So don't think you're ever stupid. And I try to get that through to people, that everyone is in the same position when it comes to dealing with after a storm. You know, you've lost your biggest asset in all likelihood, or substantially damaged. And I can't tell you how well it's worked out. It gives people a sense of relief. And then I speak to them for 3 hours after that. And I go over every element of the flood policy, the coverages, the limitations, the exclusions, because it is a very limited policy. And that's why it's so important to maximize your payment, to do everything that's required by the policy. So it's worked out well, and people have to understand what they're going through. It's emotional, there's depression, there's anger. Go through it, experience it. You have to. It's been documented. And the sooner a person, a flood survivor or hurricane survivor, gets to acceptance, the better off they are and their claim will be. So that's what I talk to people about first and foremost, either on an individual level or in these group settings after Sandy and Hurricane Harvey, which was out in Houston back in 2017, Ian and Irma. I've been to basically every major event. So not every, but almost every.
You're going to go through a lot.
Well, sometimes I'm at one event and I don't get to there's another storm in another state. So that happens often too. And that again stresses the importance, as I said earlier, there's a shortage of independent adjusters, to be quite honest, on large scale events. And when you have multiple events in multiple states and cities, it's so important for the insured, the policyholder, the homeowner, to document their loss with the photographs before they throw anything out. They have to just snap away. And with camera phones, that's fine too. And then you'll just email the photos to the adjuster once he does get there. Because sometimes it's a month or two. I just got off the phone yesterday with an attorney who's representing like 6 clients out on Siesta Key and Casey Key. And he told me he hasn't even received the estimate yet from the adjuster. And we're 7 months into it. And I said, this is why you need to document, why I've told you since the beginning to document it, document the loss. It's so important.
Yeah, I mean, and especially too, since we are going into season. I mean, you know, hands down, I think the most important thing you can do, you know, that if you're going to take anything from this, you know, go through your documents, make sure your policy is okay. And then the other part is, you know, document everything. And even I've heard from people before, oh, the refrigerator was, you know, a gift from so-and-so or whatever. If it costs value to replace it, document it.
I think what you're talking about, whether you received it as a birthday gift, an anniversary gift, that's yours. And it's insured under the policy. We owe you for the replacement cost. Now, in NFIP, it's less depreciation. You don't get depreciation back on personal property and appliances on the NFIP policy. Having said that, those, just so you know, you have to take a picture of the model and serial number plate on every appliance and large item that has a...
Oh, good to know.
Yes, so FEMA requires that, and most companies do as well, because they get tossed out often. If you have 3 feet of water, they're all damaged beyond repair.
Yeah.
We do need the photographs of the model and serial number, and people will take those off your front yard. You put appliances out, even though it's illegal, and I've seen people be arrested up in St. Pete for trying to take those appliances because they sell it for scrap. So people need to take pictures of their model and serial number. But it doesn't matter who you got the personal property or the appliance from. It's in your house, you own it, and the policy owes to replace it, either actual cash value or replacement cost value, possibly.
Yeah.
So documentation is number one. There's basically 3 things, if you want to put it in a nutshell, that I came up with when I talk to the people after a storm. I say you need to do 3 things, and this is right after I talk about grief. I want to talk about the most important things first, because you kind of lose people sometimes after 2 or 3 hours. But I say 3 things you need to do is to maximize your payment of your claim and prevent, and that word again, leakage, which is a shortfall of payment that you were owed that you did not get for whatever reason, documentation, what have you. And the 3 things are quite simple. Document your loss, stabilize your house, vet your contractor. Okay, a lot of things. So those 3 things. We've talked about documentation. Stabilize your house after a flood, what that means, or a hurricane. Tarp your roof. Your duties and responsibilities after a storm as a policyholder, a homeowner. You have to mitigate your loss, prevent further loss. And to do that in a windstorm event, you tarp your roof if necessary. It's not always necessary, but sometimes it is. On a flood loss, obviously, you have to get the wet building components out. So if you have 2 feet of water, a 2-foot water line, it's going to wick up on the drywall. So you have to do a 4-foot cut all the way around. It's actually called a 4-foot flood cut. So everything under 4 feet has to come out. Your base cabinets in your kitchen, your showers, your bathrooms, and then they can start the dry out process. A contractor should not be putting in fans and blowers if all the wet building components have not been taken out. And they have to do readings. They have to do what are called moisture maps and moisture readings every day, because otherwise the NFIP won't pay whatever their invoice comes in at. And people have to be aware of that. The NFIP has set strict guidelines on how we pay for dry out. And therefore, if we don't see a moisture map or moisture readings for the 3 days, it typically only takes 3 days to dry out a house that got flooded with 2 feet of water.
Wow.
Because you're taking out all the wet building components. And if you've done that, 3 days is all it really takes. And unless you can substantiate why that didn't take place, NFIP is not going to just pay the invoice to the mitigation company. And so who does that come back on? That comes back on the homeowner. They have a $20,000 bill and the NFIP may only pay $15,000 or whatever the number is. So people have to be aware, and tried talking to people, but sometimes it's too late. By the time they file the claim, the flood is already
fast.
And if they're lucky enough to get a contractor in right away, they just start tearing everything out. Then they give them a $30,000 bill. And it's unfair to the homeowner. The dry out companies should know what FEMA's requirements are, because they've been in place since 2013 after Superstorm Sandy. They've got FEMA was presented with egregious dry out bills from New York and New Jersey, and they basically put out what's called a bulletin and gave us instructions on how we are allowed to pay for a dry out bill. And the first thing and foremost is if they have moisture map. If they don't have that, we're going to pay them by square foot only, and it's usually a lot less than what the dry out bill comes at. So again, to repeat, you have to document your loss, stabilize your house, and then finally vet your contractor. So let's talk about that, vetting your contractor. It's pretty simple, folks. You have to make sure you've got to find a contractor, and the first thing you need to do is find out, do they have a license? And they have to present you with a certificate of insurance. Call up the insurance agency, verify the insurance, go online, check to make sure they're a licensed contractor here in the state of Florida or whatever state you live in. And that's so important, because there are countless examples of contractors ripping off homeowners, and then they're gone with the wind, no pun intended. And the homeowner's left hanging the bag. The insurance company may have paid you, but they'll be like, sorry. The insurance company, whether it be the NFIP or homeowners, typically is not responsible for the rebuild, okay? There are some insurance companies that have what's called a managed repair program, and that does take that element away from it. But 90% of the people out there, 95% of the homeowners out there, you're responsible for your contractor and your repairs. So this is what I'm talking about, getting to acceptance by the men and women that are the flood survivors, homeowners. Once you get to acceptance, then you deal with the contractor, and you have to fully vet them. So those 3 things: documentation, stabilize your house, and vet your contractor. That's what it boils down to in a nutshell.
Perfect.
And get to acceptance, of course. So,
Yeah.
no, this storm was not the biggest of all the flooding events. You had Helene and Milton. Helene had approximately, don't quote me, about 56,000 flood claims with the NFIP, throw in several thousand more for private flood. And then Milton had another 22,000 or so. 77,000 is nothing to sneeze at. That's a big event. In New York, Sandy was 144,000. Ian was 44,000 flood policies. But then you have the wind policies too. You know, the wind claims that came into that. And I think Helene produced not much because those were 35 mile per hour winds. So that wasn't really a wind event. Helene was a flooding event. Milton was both a flood and a wind event. As you remember, there was tornadoes on the eastern part of Florida. And I think there was about 100,000, don't quote me, on the wind side. So you have independent adjusters that are coming in from all over the country. As an independent adjuster, as I said earlier, we can work for any insurance company when they're overwhelmed with claims. And we have to leave our friends and family on a moment's notice and go to Houston, Texas, or New York, or wherever the storm or the event is. Joplin, Missouri, the horrific tornado, I think it was in 2011. Probably one of the most horrific events I've been to was probably Joplin. And a tornado is so much worse because there's no warning or very little warning. Yeah. There's no reason, I believe, in this day and time that people should be endangered from a hurricane. Listen to the local forecast. I can't tell you, every person I've ever spoken to in 3 decades who stayed behind on whatever event wish they hadn't. On a category 3 or whatever. And as we know from certain hurricanes, they can go from a 1 to a 3 like that. And so just evacuate for 24 hours. I mean, I evacuated during Milton, and Milton went right over my house, you know, and so, but I've seen it before. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't evacuate. Yeah. And so I jumped in my RV. I have an RV that I travel the country in these storms. And I went 200 miles north, somewhere Ocala or somewhere. I went to a friend's cabin. So anyway, so listen to the local forecast, people, and just get out of danger.
Yeah, and just how he said, you know, you don't have to, it's not like you have to go to another state or whatever. You just have to get out of harm's way.
Right.
You know, so if it's, 200 miles or if it's more inland or whatever the case is, make yourself safer, wherever you choose to go.
Right. Take your valuables with you that are irreplaceable. Photographs, licenses, contracts, things you can't replace. Look, we can replace drywall, baseboard, pair of jeans and clothing. That can all be replaced. You're insured for it. Take the things of value that are irreplaceable. Those are always the heartfelt moments when you go into a house with homeowner and they see certain things, photographs that they didn't grab and things of that nature. And that's always the hardest part, when they see the valuables that are invaluable and irreplaceable. Yeah. So
yeah, make sure you document, pay attention, especially to this season. We just had, I know we're going to have Bob Bunting on again. We had the forecast yesterday for this season. Who knows what it's going to bring, but at the end of the day, our whole goal here is to try to prepare people as much as possible. So that's what Kevin does. That's what he's doing, and that's what he continues to do. He will help you after, hopefully you won't need to see him knocking on your door. He is not the face you want coming to your house.
Well, but a lot of people say to me afterwards, Kevin, you've been great, but I never want to see you again.
Yes.
So I think every adjuster gets that at one point if they work long enough. And, we get it. We get it. Yeah. So I only wish that people would know this, what we're talking about.
Yes.
This should be on the airwaves before every hurricane season. And certainly leading up to a hurricane, when we know days in advance, if not a week, when they, the forecasts are more accurate, but they're not 100%. Yeah. But we all know in advance. And this kind of information should be in everybody's mind. It's part of being responsible as an adult. You're a homeowner. You've worked all your life and you've done something right to own a home. Now do the next step to be prepared. I'd like to talk about a little bit about what's available after the storm besides insurance.
I'm going to wrap this one.
Okay.
But I do want to say, Kevin, you've been great, but I do want to see you again. And I want to see you after a storm. So I have a feeling we are going to have a storm. And from that standpoint, I think either we do another episode on after the storm or just talk to people there. But I think it would be awesome to have you, more, I think, like after a storm to go over with people as well. Because as far as like the information today, I think it's been fantastic. I can't even say it. I think it's been fantastic.
Well, no, I wish I had a platform to do this all the time in every major city that gets hit, because unfortunately people just think insurance and they think, it'll never happen to me. And I can't tell you how many people have said that over the years. Oh, we've never flooded before. Well, and then the people said, first of all, 30% of flooding happens in non-high risk zones. And people have to understand that just because you're not required to have flood insurance doesn't mean you won't get flooded. Because as FEMA says on their website, if it rains where you live, you can flood. And that's what happened to the people in Houston for Hurricane Ike, 52 inches of rain. Inland, it wasn't on the coastal flooding, and there were 85,000 policies, which is great. Those people weren't required necessarily to have flood insurance. Unfortunately, 400,000 properties approximately flooded. And so if you get hit by a flood and you don't have flood insurance, you better be prepared on a standard 2,000 square foot home, be prepared to write a check for $125,000 or more. And most people, quite honestly, aren't.
No.
So
I couldn't.
Anyway, I thank you. I appreciate your
you.
time.
Yeah.
Thanks for
absolutely.
listening.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. As you can see, there's a lot of things that you need to know about insurance, how to prepare yourself, your family, your home, but definitely keep in contact with us. We will give you all the information we possibly can. So be sure to follow us, like us, share, download the app, do all that fun stuff, and then stay tuned again because we got more information for you. But thanks for listening.